All right, so welcome again. Tonight's discussion is being brought to you by the Women's Center and through the efforts of our amazing partners, the Ispembina Institute, who are in turn being supported in this work by a grant from Women and Gender Equity Canada. My name is Nevena Ivanovic, and I'm the Public Policy Coordinator at the Women's Center. The Women's Center is a community organization that provides a safe and supportive space accessed by thousands of women in Calgary. We offer women opportunities to both receive and provide support, connect with other women, learn and engage around issues, and work for change. The Women's Center has been committed to developing community-driven proposals to addressing women's inequality in the past. And we continue with that as we work to support a more just and equal future for women post-pandemic. We believe that whether we build or rebuild successfully depends on the development and implementation of ambitious policies that address pre-existing inequalities based on gender, income, race, ethnicity, and other factors at their roots. We've organized a number of different conversations this year to hear from women about the barriers they're facing, their priorities, and about possible solutions. We will be hosting many more in the next year, so please stay tuned. For us, tonight is about hearing about all those in a very specific context, that of the energy transition. And we are very grateful to our friends at Ispembina for bringing this conversation to you. Tonight, my role is to welcome you and share some housekeeping items before I pass it on to your facilitator, Sarah Winstanley, who will have her own introduction to this discussion and tell you more about how tonight will look like. I'd like to briefly introduce and thank our whole support team tonight. From the Women's Center, it's Vanessa, our practicum student, Diane, our operations manager, and we have from Ispembina, Geneviève Duaron, and Laura Hughes, and Sarah Nason, and then Lauren Forrest from the University of Waterloo. The next thing I want to cover is just some guidelines for a safe online space. I'm going to just go through them briefly. We welcome and respect everyone. We assume that everyone has good intentions, and we acknowledge the impact of our words and actions. We all have capacities. We are all learning together. We appreciate diversity and value everyone's voice. We treat and care for everyone equally. We recognize that we have all been socialized in a world full of institutionalized power imbalances and isms. We value confidentiality. We are open to discussion to ensure a safer learning environment. And finally, some Zoom guidelines or etiquette. Right. So we are recording this session. Please be so kind to mute yourself during this first part. There's some help if you need help to figure that out. We also recommend that you turn on your speaker view so you can focus on the person speaking. Also, the facilitator will use Mentimeter later on to ask you some questions to get the pulse of the group. So you can go to menti.com to participate. The second part of tonight will include 2 consecutive breakout room conversations, and don't worry, you will get all the instructions from the facilitator and in the chat. Finally, there'll be a short survey distributed at the end through the chat. It's our feedback survey. We appreciate it very much if you could complete that. So with that, I am going to pass this on to Sarah for a land acknowledgement and her introduction. Thank you for being here tonight. And Sarah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Nevena. I'm just gonna share my screen here. Here we go. So, okay. So thank you so much, Nevena, for that introduction. Yeah, I'm a Women's Center super fan. I have had a long relationship with the center, so I'm really excited to be, back with the Women's Center in a different capacity, working with Ispembina to facilitate this workshop. This is the first of several workshops we'll be doing over the next few months. And so, thank you for being here and participating in this first event. So I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. I wanted to talk about and acknowledge that I'm cared for by Treaty 7 land, which contains the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Iarhe or Stoney Nakoda Nations, which includes the Wesley, Bearspaw, and Chiniki First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation Region 3. And I personally am in Mohkinstsis, like I'm sure many of you are, where the Bow and the Elbow rivers meet. And so I'm actually not that far from that spot. I run by it all the time. I know sometimes when we talk about reconciliation, people maybe are unsure about where to begin to think about it for themselves. So I wanted to also highlight a couple of documents that some really powerful Indigenous leaders have already put together and encourage all Canadians to look at. And that is the TRC final report, as well as Reclaiming Power in Place, which is, stories from people across the nation kind of talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and just bringing attention to that. And there's some calls to action in there for things that people in all kinds of sectors and spaces can take those actions. So I think Diane will put those in the chat. Thank you, Diane. And then I wanted to introduce myself kind of using some questions from, I guess, a workbook I've been using from the Nahanni Creative. And so they have a section on decolonizing relations. I would really encourage people to check them out. But they start by asking, who am I? So I'm Sarah. I'm a friend, a daughter, a partner, and a sister. I'm a lover of nature and a lover of donuts. And I'm also an analyst with the Pembina Institute, working on the Women in the Energy Transition Project. I am a third or fourth generation settler on Turtle Island. I'm English on my dad's side and German on my mom's side. And I think the people that I connect the most with are people who are trying to make the world safer and more equitable. So I'm sure lots of you today maybe identify with that. Today I'm feeling a little bit nervous, I have to be honest, but I really love so many of the women who are part of this community, so I always feel really happy to be here. And what we're going to explore today is probably not something brand new, but it's kind of in maybe a different context that you've talked about it before, around barriers that women might be facing in the energy transition. So as I talk about anything around women's issues and sort of taking action on those, I also want to express gratitude for the women who've been fighting for justice over time, and also the women who care for this land that we're on, whatever that looks like. So that's a little bit about me. And yeah, so maybe next I just wanted to do a couple of introductions. Nevin has done some really great ones, so I'll make this brief. So welcome. Yeah, I'm really happy everybody is here. We're here because we will be exploring Pembina's new project on women in Alberta's energy transition. I will share a little bit about what we've learned so far in some of this. This is a fairly new project for us, but we have some kind of information to share. And then we'll spend some time learning from all of you and from each other. So I want to start, before I even move into any of that, by defining what we mean when we say energy. This means all kinds of energy. And it might create like an image in your head of what that means, but we're referring to things like renewable energy from sources like solar and wind, as well as non-renewable energy that comes from oil and gas and mining. So I just want to clarify, we're talking about all kinds of energy today. Sorry, I keep clicking around. So this project, just to give you a bit of context, arose from knowing that we need to center the diverse experiences and needs of women as we transition to cleaner energy systems in Alberta. So it was recognized by Pembina that women are systemically excluded from the energy industry in Alberta, and that if we don't take action during the transition, the same issues will keep happening in our new energy system. And so while we did some research and we hope you find it helpful, it's also really important for us to speak to all of you folks who are here and women in the province to know about their experiences and their ideas for solutions. I know the Women's Centre does that super well, so it seems like a really good fit for us to be here asking for your input. And so this, like I said, this is the first of a few events we'll be hosting. And the feedback that we hear will inform Pembina's advocacy on policy around an energy transition that works for everyone. So this feedback that you share tonight will really inform what kinds of solutions Pembina advocates for in our work. So I want to thank the Women's Centre, especially Nevin and Diane, for having us and supporting this event. And yeah, I guess I just want to thank everyone that Nevin mentioned earlier. Laura and Sarah Nason in particular have been really helpful in putting this together, and you'll get to meet them later in the breakout rooms. I also want to thank Women and Gender Equality Canada and the McConnell Foundation for supporting this work. So I would love to know, and I'll invite you to share in the chat, what brought all of you here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Pembina Institute is, but if you feel like sharing in the chat, it would be awesome to know, why are you here? What's your interest? It could be everything from like, I just had no idea about, I don't know what the energy transition is. I'm like somebody in energy, could be anything. So just let us know what brought you here tonight. So what is the Pembina Institute? I am also learning this myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of 3 months into this job. So I'm learning that Pembina does a lot of great work. And so we are a nonprofit think tank that advocates for strong and effective policies to support Canada's clean energy transition. So really looking at what policies do we need in this place to make sure this transition happens in an equitable way for everybody. So we do research and analysis. We bring people together like yourselves tonight to kind of talk about solutions. And then, yeah, we kind of provide those credible perspectives to decision makers and policy makers around what the research, but also what people in Alberta, for example, are saying about issues. So this is our mission and our vision. I'll just share that with you. But I think what really strikes me is that the Pembina Institute envisioning a world where our needs are met in ways that do all these different things, so that protect natural ecosystems, ensure clean air, land and water, stop contributing to climate change, and promote the just global community, which I think that justice piece is really important when we talk about women's role in this transition. This kind of breaks it down a little bit more specifically about what the areas that Pembina focuses on in this transition. So we're talking about electricity grids, transportation systems, homes and buildings, and an energy system that recognizes the shifting role for fossil fuels, as well as looking at the economy and how to make sure that that is competitive and inclusive for everybody. So that's Pembina. I think at some point we will have in the chat a link to our website, so you can kind of check us out and read a little bit more about what Pembina does. There's so many reports on the website too about everything related to energy. So feel free to check that out too if you have more questions or an interest in that. So this is a quick overview of what we will do today. So the goals are to explore the transition. What are the opportunities within that for women? And part of that is defining what the energy transition is to Pembina. And then chatting about barriers for women to participate and lead in that transition, and then develop solutions together. So this will be kind of, yeah, a chance for people to throw out their ideas of like, what is it that would make this thing better for women? What's something you've seen elsewhere work, maybe in a different industry? So yeah, just to really get into that. And the outline kind of reflects those goals. So just to give you an idea of what you're in for. So when we speak about women, I think it's really important that to highlight, sorry, I'm like, I always look happy when I do this. I need to sit on my hands. I want to highlight that women can be a useful description to explore issues that are gender-based, but that no two women have the same experiences. All of us live with intersecting identities around race, class, ability, age, citizenship, indigeneity, and much more. So you can kind of see that in the center of this circle that I've put up on the screen. Towards the kind of darker green circle, we all experience different privileges and oppressions as a result of those identities. And that's kind of related to those forces on the outside that shape those experiences. It's not individuals' fault that these things happen, but they are a reality of many of our lives. So just keeping that in mind when we talk about women, we are trying to think about that as broadly and intersectionally as we possibly can. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to invite people to fill out a poll if they're comfortable. And I'll give you a bit of context. So a lot of the research we've been doing so far emphasizes the need for more information about how women who live at those intersections experience different issues. So kind of knowing as robust a story as we can. So we just invite you to share about your identity if you're comfortable in this anonymous poll. So you can select kind of multiple identities. There'll be another question about experiences, and just to help us tell a better story about who we spoke to in this engagement process. And then also to see if we haven't spoken to different groups of women, why that might be and how do we do that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and I'm gonna open up a poll. So if you can see on your screen here, oh no, okay. I think actually the poll has to be shared by the host. So Nevena, can I ask you to share the poll? I know this might be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, I think we need to, the host has to do it. So,
Okay.
okay. So there should be just a thing at the bottom that says poll.
Yeah, launch, right?
Yeah, you're good. So yeah, it should be coming up for people if it's been launched. Devin, has it been, did you click
Yeah,
launch?
people are doing it. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why I can't see it. That's strange. Okay, good to know. But if other people can see it, that's fine. I think
How would you like me to report back to you on it?
We can talk about that after, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. And I wanted to make a note too that I think there's a section that says racialized or person of color. I know neither of those are perfect terms, and people's identities are a lot more diverse than that. So yeah, I just wanted to note that I know that that's not totally adequate, but the number of yeah, kind of number of questions we could ask kind of limited us there. So all right. So maybe once everyone's filled that out, I don't know, Nevin, if you want to share the results with the group.
I made you host, Sarah, actually.
Okay.
So you can do the next one. But
I actually can't see it for some reason. I'm so sorry. But that's okay. I think if we did the first one, we can move on. Because
I think the room was, I asked you how you would like me to report back. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to share with the group, but yeah, the group is kind of over half, people identify as white, with some representation from racialized and other groups. Sorry, it closed for me too when you became host. So
that's okay. This is like a good learning for me. So thank you, Nevena, for sharing and rolling with it. So yeah, thank you everybody for giving some of their insights into that. I'm going to share my screen again and kind of continue on with the presentation here. So yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit about yourselves. I know that not everybody feels comfortable doing that, and that's totally fine. I'm just going to get back open here to my screen. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is another opportunity for you to kind of give some input. So when we talk about the energy transition, a lot of what we talk about is jobs and employment. And I know that there's more to it than that, but that's kind of what Pembina is focusing on in the transition. So we want to start this convo by hearing anonymously from you using something called Mentimeter or Menti. And so the first question that we wanted to ask you was, what is a good job to you? So I think that Sarah Nason is going to put some instructions in the chat, but you have 3 options to participate in this. So you can actually go to menti.com and type in the code that will be shared in the chat. You can also click, there should be a link shared as well that you could just take you directly to the page, or you could just put your answer in the chat. If you're like, I don't really feel like jumping on a different platform, that's totally fine. So those are your options. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and share my Mentimeter screen. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, so. Okay, so you should see the Mentimeter screen now. I'm going to, basically you should get onto menti.com. You can also then type in this code, and then it should take you to a place that prompts you to input your thoughts. So I'm going to start actually on what is a good job to you. So feel free to just add what that means to you, and that can be anything. So I'll just give you a moment to insert some of your comments. Okay, so the first thing somebody has written is union. All right. And good job is one where I feel valued and have a voice, included in discussions of the strategies of the business and given the opportunity to be part of the growth and direction. Awesome. Somebody else has put one where I have autonomy in what I do. All right, these are great answers. It's engaging, challenging, fun, and worthwhile. Cool. We'll give it a few more moments for people to insert. I think it's interesting too, because I think good jobs are different things to different people. So it's interesting to hear different pieces of that. Somebody has written where I can see meaningful change taking place, no more same old, same old. Okay, so something that's maybe innovative and moving. This person has said, my opinion is valued and my contributions recognized. That's big, that's awesome. Flexibility to raise a family, a team that values everyone's opinion fairly. Awesome. Supportive coworkers and managers, autonomy, stability, work-life balance. Awesome. And work that feels meaningful, interesting, and has an inclusive environment. That's awesome. Vacation time, that's a big one. These are great answers. Okay, maybe I'll give just 30 more seconds in case anybody hasn't been able to add in. Somebody's also said teamwork, growth, care for people. Awesome. Okay, autonomy and dignity. That's great. So I think maybe what I'll do, thank you so much for putting in these. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about good jobs later as well when we get into the literature review. I'm going to just move over. The next question that we wanted to ask you is, what are your barriers to getting a good job? So it looks like some folks are already in here, which is awesome. You might have seen a prompt to move over if you're not yet. But it looks like people have put things like education, lack of Canadian experience, my skills are not valued, childcare, experience, a job where I can use my skills as a geologist or geographer and EDI specialist. Yeah, that's like a really great like overlap in skills. Education as well, STEM professional trying to re-engage back into the workforce. And too often I'm asked to work for free. That's a huge, yeah, that's a great one. Thank you for putting that in. Also, I don't know the right people. I don't know if, yeah, I guess this is an anecdote, but I've heard Calgary is in particular a place like that, where kind of knowing people is one of the most helpful things to getting a job, but maybe that's the case for other places too. But this person says, interest, I have other priorities. Yeah, jobs are not maybe the main focus for many of us, and that's great. A lack of experience in the industry, large pool of other candidates applying for the same work. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So thank you so much. This is really interesting. And I'm definitely going to save these answers. Because some of these things that you've mentioned are definitely things that came up in the research that Pembina has been doing. So I think, yeah, it's really valuable to kind of hear your input and kind of hear a couple new things in there too. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Let's see here. Okay. So where were we at? So let's actually go into talking about what the energy transition is, because you might be wondering, some of you might know really well, and some of you might have been like me a few months ago being like, what exactly is the energy transition? So I am just going to share a couple slides about that to kind of set some context. So the energy transition is essentially moving our energy systems that provide power for our homes, move our personal and public vehicles, heat and cool our buildings, homes, apartments, etc., to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And a goal many folks are rallying around, you may have heard the term net zero. This just means getting to a point where we ensure we emit no more greenhouse gas emissions than we remove from the atmosphere. So there's like a whole lot more science to that, but maybe we'll just kind of leave it at that for the kind of technical definition. But the transition also involves not just energy, but the industries that may not be directly related to energy. So that could be things like administrative work, care work, domestic work, that kind of thing. So on this slide, I've included some images just to kind of paint a little bit of a picture. So you can see on the top left is actually what they call a net zero home in Ramsey. Beside it is a picture of some solar panels. Beside that is a woman using an electric vehicle charging station. And below that are images of healthcare workers and children. So different groups around the world have also started to advocate for us to value, support, and properly compensate workers in industries that are already dominated by workers who are women as part of the transition. So I just wanted to flag that as like, that's also part of the conversation, even as we talk about women specifically in energy. So why does this matter? Why does the energy transition, why is it important? Why are we even talking about it? So these greenhouse gas emissions that I mentioned are, influencing global. Otherwise, some of those impacts of climate change that we're starting to see will continue to worsen. So for Alberta, flooding, fires, some wacky and unpredictable weather are some of the effects that we've been seeing in Alberta. And this might continue if we don't start investing in this shift. We also know that climate change impacts women in specific and harmful ways. And a couple of examples are around often women are responsible for feeding their families, so increased food prices related to climate issues definitely are going to and have probably started to impact women. And then also just thinking about the more sort of natural disasters we've been seeing, oftentimes women are the last to kind of flee those places where that they happen because they're responsible for making sure that children are safe, making sure that elders are safe, and doing some of that care work even in the midst of a natural disaster. So just, two very quick examples. There's lots more out there about that as well. So there's also economic opportunity. So the government could invest lots of money in creating sustainable infrastructure, which involves like equipment and structures, which could mean lots of new jobs in Alberta, and could also include investment in low emission sectors like healthcare, for example, or other types of care work. And also, there's an opportunity to create resilient and long-term options for workers and communities. So those kind of stable, reliable jobs that are based around renewable energy potentially. There's no end date for when the sun hopefully will stop shining. So there's kind of maybe more stability to some of those roles and those kind of industries than maybe some communities have experienced so far. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that kind of paints a bit of a picture. At Pembina, we've kind of been thinking about this for a while. So one of our coworkers named Saeed Kadora looked at job opportunities for Alberta in the energy transition a couple of years ago. And you can see some of the ways those jobs have been broken down across the energy industry in this little pie here. I also feel every time I say pie, I think of actual pie. But what does this mean for women? So 67,200 jobs could be created by 2030 in this transition. But where are women in this picture? So I wanted to share, we do know a little bit from the research that my coworkers did that renewable energy does hire a few more women than traditional energy, which is great and promising, but there are other ways that we can definitely make it a more inclusive transition for women. So this map is by no means a well-researched map. It's more like a brainstorm that myself and my coworkers kind of put together. So it's just kind of trying to help map out some of these opportunities that might be interesting for women or might be open to women. So I will talk through it really quickly. But I also would like to know what you think those opportunities could be, because I'm sure there are experts in this room who have their own ideas, their own experiences. So feel free to share that in the chat if you have other things you want to add to this. And I'll just quickly talk through. So one of the ways that women could be involved and already are involved is around advocacy and leadership. So women at all levels of politics kind of advocating for policies that support this transition. That's really important. Grassroots activists and leaders who are kind of pushing from the outside. So I'm just thinking about the Niitsitapi water protectors. They're definitely led by women and doing some really important work. So there's also environmental and social nonprofits, and women, if they're in that position to be able to create or lead companies, then that's also something that where women's leadership can be really, can show. There's also the care industry. I feel like I've mentioned it a couple times. It's already a low emissions. Doesn't produce a lot of emissions already, and there's lots of women there. So kind of thinking about what the role of that industry is in this conversation. There's also all those admin and support roles. So HR, if we think about industry culture, we'll talk about that a little bit. HR could have a really big role in helping create safe cultures for people. Finance, cleaning and domestic roles, IT and technical support. And then there's trades. So I don't know if other people think this way, but sometimes trades and STEM are easier for me to think about as they relate to the transition. So they're definitely part of it too. So trades could be building that infrastructure, renovating buildings so that they're more sustainable, transit and electric vehicle infrastructure. Those are things that trades could be involved in. And then with STEM, there's clean technology, science and engineering jobs, and then research and development. So there's much more to all of this, but this is just kind of a quick snapshot. And yeah, if people want to add their own thoughts in the chat, I don't know, Diane, if you've seen any comments from the chat, feel free to share them. I'll maybe just give. Okay. Well, yeah, if people have other ideas, it's also totally okay if you're like, well, this is the first time I'm hearing any of this. So just, yeah, we'll just leave it at that. So I'm just going to check my time. Okay, looks like we're on time, so that's good. So I wanted to, this is kind of the first kind of big piece of work that Pembina has done on looking at the role of women in Alberta's energy transition. I want to shout out my coworkers because I don't know if they're all here. Genevieve and Laura, yeah, co-authored this report, and Emma, I think, was signed up to come tonight, but I don't know if she's here. But they all wrote this paper, and the Women's Centre actually reviewed it as well. So I'll just give you a quick overview, and I think maybe Diane will share the link to it in the chat so that people can go to it and actually read it. I think it's about 30 pages. So if you're like keen to dive in, feel free to visit the Pembina website. But essentially, overall, the report found that there are 5 key barriers that show up along all points of a woman in energy's career journey, from stereotypes about what girls are naturally suited for, quote unquote, in childhood, to professional networks that exclude women even in the highest leadership positions. So it's kind of all along this process and experience for women and girls. And that these barriers, this probably maybe won't come as a surprise, they're rooted in cultural and social norms that also show up very powerfully in male-dominated environments. So for example, in STEM programs or on remote work sites where the majority of workers might be men, these kind of barriers show up pretty strongly. They also influence each other, and we'll kind of see that as we talk about that, and often have the results of women in their roles in the energy sector feeling disempowered or wanting to leave the sector or not even consider it in the first place because of things they maybe have heard or know about that industry. The other thing that was found kind of throughout the process is that there's just more data needed around gender and experiences of women who face marginalization in multiple ways beyond gender, which is kind of the case in a lot of research, that there isn't enough data. And a lot of this research also was rounded out by information from national and international sources. So kind of thinking about, the regional specific, Alberta specific data is also not super full. So just kind of those are some of the things that overall we can say. I'm going to get into sharing a little bit about the barriers specifically. So just to kind of give you, these are the things that we'll talk about in our breakout rooms. So I just wanted to give people kind of an overview, and then you'll get to dive deeper into them when you're actually in those breakout rooms with your with your people who are also interested in that topic. But the first barrier was around lack of access to opportunity. And so the report found that women have low enrollment rates in STEM education programs compared to men, likely due to those kind of gender norms, cultural and social, about what kind of work women are supposed to do and what they kind of get steered towards at a very young age. And this low number of women in STEM programs leads to fewer women in the energy industry, because those students are often the ones who are attached to then work in the energy industry, whether it's traditional energy, renewables, and those are the folks that often end up in those industries. So it's kind of along that track. Those informal male-dominated career networks. So for example, those things where people maybe do things together outside of work, so maybe go for beers or go golfing or those kinds of things, tend to exclude women and can prevent them from gaining access to career opportunities that happen kind of just through relationship building and that kind of thing. And then the final thing that this kind of made up this barrier was something called benevolent sexism. And I've only recently kind of learned this term, but it makes so much sense to me. And it's essentially those sexist beliefs and stereotypes that are presented positively, that kind of praise women, but at the same time reinforce stereotypes. So something like assuming women will be gentler with machinery can affect a woman's whole career, but especially when she's moving into a role with more responsibility. And so, yeah, that kind of alongside that STEM barrier, those roles tend to be more technical, what you might consider more unsafe jobs. And so that kind of maybe paternalism or that benevolent sexism often impacts women in that way as well. So although there's less of a gendered image associated with the renewable energy sector, this exclusion is likely to continue just because a lot of renewable energy workers come from STEM. So that kind of women in STEM issue carries into the renewable sector as well. So just something to be aware of as we think about the transition. So the second barrier, I'm just going to take a moment to breathe because sometimes I just talk really fast. The second barrier is around a lack of good jobs. So we talked about good jobs earlier, and oftentimes good jobs differ for men and women based on sometimes the roles they might hold in their families and all kinds of other factors. So for women, often good jobs involve flexibility in hours and where they have to go in to work in order to accommodate some of the other responsibilities they might have. So that might be like, caring for the household, caring for children, and that we know women tend to do more of even today. So there's also a lack of affordable, accessible childcare that creates barriers for women across pretty much all sectors in the workforce. And I know the Women's Center does some great advocacy work around that. And then just thinking about, while women often prefer part-time positions for their flexibility, they often limit women's ability to advance because they impact her perceived status at work, or create questions around whether she's really committed to her job. So that flexibility can be great for women, but then how it gets perceived at work is something often that's a barrier for women to moving into new opportunities. And then finally, women tend to have less job security and be vulnerable to layoffs during times of like economic downturn, like the pandemic that we're in. We've kind of seen that across the board because they tend to be in positions that are undervalued, part-time or entry level within energy. So the third barrier, I promise, I always feel like you'll hear my voice for a little bit longer and then you'll hear each other's voices. I feel like I've been hearing my voice all day. So the third barrier is around the inability to advance. So the research found, and it's, again, not unique to energy, but the further up you go in terms of seniority, there are fewer women there and less diversity generally. And so some of those reasons are around those gender norms. I feel like I'm going to say gender norms like 800 times in this conversation. The lack of role models, so women not maybe seeing other women in those roles, particularly women who are racialized or have other identities as well. And then there's fewer opportunities for advancement in those jobs that women tend to occupy. So around human resources and finance, that advancement is limited in those roles as compared to say like a technical role or a STEM related job. We spoke about this kind of gaps in employment or part-time work seen negatively. And these biases actually, the assumption, for example, that a woman might at a certain age like become pregnant, and so she maybe is taken off kind of the running for a leadership position is something that definitely still happens. So kind of, just thinking about, even if a woman has no plans for that to happen in her life, she might still be affected by the biases that a leader might have about what they think will happen in her life. So it's kind of interesting that way. And again, that lack of access to networks and mentorship, a lot of these kind of barriers overlap with each other. That lack of meaningful data on representation in Alberta within the energy industry and the lack of policies in place to address some of these issues mean that change is slow. And then as we think about the energy transition, there's an opportunity to look at like what kind of targets for inclusion could be set within that process to make sure that the same gender inequity isn't replicated. So I think it's interesting for us to kind of think about some of these things and learn from the more established fossil fuel sector. The fourth barrier is the income gap. And I've put kind of like a shout out to the Women's Center here because they do a lot of work around income injustice and poverty reduction, which is so important. And so the research found that within Alberta's, sorry, I'm clicking around. So the research found that the mining, oil, and gas extraction sectors are among the largest kind of influence over income equality across Canada. I can't find my words. And they actually contribute to Alberta having one of the largest gender income gaps in the country. So that's pretty massive. I think when we read this, a lot of people working on the report were like, oh my gosh, that's pretty big, that it influences kind of the whole country in terms of income inequality. And I see the Women's Center's research says in Calgary in particular, women make only 63% of what men earn. So it's kind of interesting to think about like what that interplay could be. I can't say definitively anything. But yeah, it's just interesting to know what the context is. One of the things the research also found was around, those feminized roles. So admin and HR are often undervalued and underpaid. So that contributes to that income gap. And then even in similar roles, women are often paid less than men and held to a higher performance standards. So again, although many of these barriers, are potentially going to reemerge within renewables, I think it's something to look at as things are dynamic and emerging. What can we address as that is all kind of everything's being thrown up in the air and kind of shifting? So income is another one we can think about. And then finally, industry culture. So I think we had a poll, but I'm not sure that it's going to work again. So I might just leave it.
Sarah, you're the host now, so it should work.
Yeah, it doesn't actually show me when I click on polls. It's still telling me that I don't have access. So I think that's okay. We can talk about after about if there's another way to ask it. But so the industry culture essentially found like a couple of different things within this section. So looking at the traditionally masculine image of the frontier in Alberta, which I would describe, so frontier culture as sort of this colonial myth that men discovered and struggled with the West to own the West and to kind of like exploit the resources and stuff like that. So yeah, it's this kind of idea that's very exclusive to women and often perpetuates or can lead to gendered microaggressions and harassment. So there's also issues around reporting violence and harassment, particularly in cultures that maybe don't feel safe for women. They're less likely to report those incidences. And those cultures often spill over into the surrounding communities. So there's often higher rates of violence in communities where especially like, there's development or an extractive project is taking place. So I think I've reached my time here for talking about some of this stuff. So I don't want to cut into your time to talk to each other. So hopefully that was enough of an overview so people can kind of understand and have like a bit of context for what the barriers that the research found. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move into our breakout groups. So